Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. It's your host, Cole Anderson. I wanted to say thank you to everybody who came out to my concert last weekend at Vashon Island. I know some people wrote me that they were coming to the concert, especially who had seen me on my channel. So thank you to everyone who did that. I really appreciate it. I had a great audience. It's a fantastic venue as well and a magnificent piano. So it was one of the more enjoyable concerts that I've given in quite a while. And I also uploaded that last Sunday, so you can check out that video in case you didn't get to go in person. Today I'm continuing my series on Brahms's shorter piano works. I am planning to get through all of Brahms's shorter piano works here pretty soon. And today we're embarking on the final work for solo piano that Brahms ever wrote in 1893, his Opus 119 piano pieces. The first piece from this set is one of the most achingly beautiful and nostalgic works that Brahms ever penned. For me, there's a little bit of the aura of Bach hovering over this work, a little bit of that style of counterpoint which seems to be suggested in the textures. So as you'll hear as we get into the piece, the soprano and the bass voices kind of echo each other and have a dialogue of sorts, which almost reminds me of something like a trio sonata. And there's definitely a little bit of that feeling about this work as well. Some of this beautiful, sinuous counterpoint which seems to surround the underlying harmonies in such a marvelously poignant way. So this was 1893. I mean, Richard Strauss was composing his tone poems by this time, and modernism, as it was understood in the early 20th century, was well on its way to its rise. Brahms, of course, considered himself to be a traditionalist and was a bit of a reactionary against many of these trends, but I think you can definitely hear the influence of modern music developments in his style in a piece like this. In particular, there are these remarkable extended chord sonorities which you get at the opening of this piece, which are quite unlike anything you would have heard in the more conservative Germanic tradition up to this time. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the opening bars of this piece, you'll see that there are these arpeggio figures, and these arpeggio figures, if you include the melody note at the end of the bar, so for that first measure it would be, counting from the bottom, E, G, B, D, F sharp, A, form an extended harmony, more specifically an 11th chord. So for those of you who are not familiar with this nomenclature, extended harmonies are created when you add more thirds on top of a basic triad. So in this case, the basic E minor triad would be E, G, and B. So 2 thirds stacked up. If you keep stacking up thirds though, if you add the D, which is a minor 7th above the bass note E, you get a minor 7th chord. If you add another third, in this case an F sharp, then you get a 9th chord, and so forth and so on. And so the A at the end of the bar makes the 11th, the interval of an 11th, a 4th, plus an octave over the bass note E. So if you've ever wondered why these chords are referred to by these kind of weird extended interval names like a 9th or an 11th, that's why. It's because we're conceptualizing them as thirds stacked upon a root note. So you get these continually in this piece, these 11th chord harmonies. Now, there's evidence at the end of the piece that Brahms is actually thinking of these chords as being dissonant harmonies, which should be resolved. None of them are really resolved in any meaningful way until we get to the very end of the piece, though. However, you can kind of see this if you look at the second and third measures here. You can see how the melody note actually resolves downward by a step in the second and third measures. So the G in the second measure resolves to F sharp, which is a note in the D major triad, or in the third measure, the C sharp, which is the 11th above the bass, resolves down to a B, which is in the chord of G major. So there is this kind of suggestion of a resolution happening, but because every time we get a new extended chord in each measure, we never really get a chance to rest or actually feel like we have reached a point of real repose. That's part of the reason why this piece has such a remarkably nostalgic and poignant character. So then you'll also notice another very important rhythmic motive here. This is first stated in the first 3 bars, where you have the long held note followed by a short 16th note. And this sort of motive continues throughout the piece, where you have a 16th note as a pickup to another note. Whether that note is shorter or longer, it varies, but you get this little rhythmic pattern with the pickup 16th again and again. So you can see it in the fourth measure in the left hand, that same motive. There's rest, 16th, and then 8th. And that's again taken up in the right hand as well. It continues the same kind of pattern, as you can see. And as we get further along in the piece, there's this kind of back and forth between the left hand and the right hand, the bass and the soprano, as I mentioned earlier, which kind of lends the piece this almost trio sonata kind of feel. Now in the B section in this piece, in the related major key of D major, the contrapuntal aspect of the music is toned down a little bit. The bass becomes more of a supporting voice, pushing the right-hand melody along. But this same rhythmic pattern with the pickup 16th is featured in this theme. That's how the sections are tied together. The middle section flowers into this very romantic, very beautiful climactic passage, during which we start to hear the opening idea of a long note followed by the 16th. That starts to come back with this falling second motive that we saw in the first three measures. And then Brahms uses a technique which is actually a Baroque fugal technique called stretto to bring back the arpeggio idea from the first few bars. So he actually has the arpeggios played alternating hands, and they overlap by one note, so it kind of feels like an acceleration of intensity here. Now, when the material from the A section repeats, Brahms has embellished it with all these passing tones, which lends the music an even more kind of creepy, chromatic quality. Once again, nothing really resolves to a definite point. Everything is always shifting and continuing and melding from one harmony to another. And at the very end, we can finally see the resolution of the extended harmony idea. So on the third from the last bar, he gives a full 13th chord. So this is a chord with as many thirds piled up over the root note as you could possibly have. In this case, it's a B minor chord. So B, D, F sharp. Then we get the 7th A sharp, the 9th C sharp, the 11th E, and the 13th G. And so at that point, you would start repeating the notes of the chord again once you got up to a B. And the idea here actually is that when you stack up these many notes, you get all the notes of a dominant chord, in this case a dominant minor 9th chord, the F sharp dominant chord, as well as the notes of the tonic triad superimposed. That's why Brahms actually uses the major 7th over the bass, A sharp here, because he wants to have the notes of the dominant 7th, or in this case, the dominant 9th chord sounding. The dominant minor 9th is the most intense dominant chord that you could imagine. And so hearing the two sonorities of the dominant chord and then the minor triad superimposed over each other is just really powerful. And then finally the right hand chord resolves so we get an actual minor triad. So Brahms is conservative to a certain point. He does actually offer us a resolution of sorts, a very dark resolution, but an actual resolution to a minor triad at the end of this piece. Other composers of the time might not have necessarily given us this resolution, but it's part of the basis for a Brahms style, so he really does give that to us, and that's part of what makes the piece so incredibly faithful and powerful, is because he is aiming for this resolution the whole way through. So there you have it, Brahms Opus 119 number 1, a powerfully concentrated miniature with enough emotional breadth to match one of Bach's passions. So I hope you enjoyed that. The complete performance is coming up in just a moment. Please do support the channel if you can. Check out my Patreon page. You can sign up to make monthly donations, or you can also purchase items in my shop. I have my latest album of the complete list, Swiss Année de Pèlerinage, up there, and I'm going to be uploading other cool items on my shop shortly as well. Thank you to all my current Patreon supporters as well, and be sure to stay tuned next week. I'll be back with more music, more conversation. Until then, take care and keep practicing.